from my perspective, you have to include both clinical psychology and transpersonal psychology to really understand it. So the clinical psychology is needed to deal with the traumatic aspects. And this is where the body holds the score. Okay, so you are going to have the emotional trauma that people experience. And you need clinical psychology to interpret and to treat that and to deal with that. And when you work through the trauma, then the spiritual aspect unfolds. Body that's participating now in the experience, and then you have to also look at it in terms of higher states of consciousness, because some of these encounters are taking place where people are seemingly out of their body. Okay, so to have somebody that can tell the difference between that subtle realm, and by subtle realm I just mean, oh gosh, the unseen dimension that is all around us, the realm of angels and aliens and
fairies and jinns.
Yes, exactly. So I'm just going to, across the board, subtle realm, and probably in some more esoteric belief systems, the astral realm as well. Okay, so I'm just going to lump that all together and say that across the board, you've got people having encounters where they're not necessarily in their physical body. Some are, I would say, and some aren't. So you've got to learn how to distinguish. You've got to learn how to tell the difference, and you've got to be able to encompass the spiritual experience or the spiritual interpretation, because that's where people finally start to integrate this experience. When you go into these experiences, that sense of who you are changes. It is shattered, and hence you have the possibility of expansion.
Would you say this is an experience that's been going on throughout human history, or is it a recent experience?
I think in some form it has, but I think there are important changes. Okay, so in that sense, I could say both. I think that our experience with higher realm beings and dimensions, it's recorded in the Vedic traditions, in the Hindu traditions.
And the Hebrew Bible.
And exactly. So you've got higher dimensional beings. You have that communication and that influence coming in, that impact on our evolution. However, now we're seeing things that I think are fairly new, and that may have to do with our the possible demise of our species. So that's the big thing with this phenomenon as well, is that people, experiencers, are very much being downloaded with information, if you will, or shown things about the environment and about our that we may not be here in the same form, even in our lifetime. Okay, and hence now there seems to be the process is being sped up, if you will. It's that it's being amplified. And so in this sense, I think that this is why the physical body is now so much a part of it.
Gordon Creighton, an English academic who was the editor of Flying Saucer Review, a great mind, a great man. He was the one who first presented the Djinn hypotheses to the UFO research field. Now, the jinns, as described in the Muslim Quran, which is the Muslim Bible, are what they call a third order of creation. The Quran describes that the angels, the first order of creation, was created first, that the jinns, the second order of creation, was created second after the angels and was given the earth to live here. but that they were paraphysical, that they did not live in space-time as such in a physical space-time world, but in a dimension around our world. And then that the third order of creation was humankind, who was given the physicality of our earth to live on. But that the earth is to be shared by jinns and humans, and that jinns are good and evil, just like humans are, and just like angels are. That they're good and evil jinns, and that according to Gordon Creighton's hypothesis, that the so-called entities, the so-called UFO entities, who reportedly abduct human beings and sexually harass them and victimize them in other ways, are actually the order of creation which the Muslims call jinns, that they are a paraphysical form of creation which shares the earth with us.
And they're appearing as flying saucer occupants?
Gordon Creighton explained very, very clearly that during the past millennia of human cultures, there have been types of sexually harassing creatures, paraphysical, which harass different cultures, but they appear in different shapes to each culture according to what the culture can accept. Their clothing, their mannerisms, their looks, according to what the culture can accept. And so I expanded on this, and I got the idea, speculation, that since the UFO, the physical UFO craft, started its new phase around 1947 in the United States, that the order of creation that the Muslims call jinns, that the Celtics call fairy folk, that the Europeans call incubi, and which other cultures all over the world, major and minor, call by different names, began to wonder how in the world could they appear to an American and frighten an American into submitting to their victimization, and that it might have taken them a while to figure out a way in which they could frighten Americans, but that eventually they thought, well, if they appeared to Americans in the form of technologically superior UFO entities from UFOs, that would frighten any American, you see. And that this is when this huge explosion of so-called abductions began, beginning in the 60s, but especially in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and continuing to this day. These creatures are deceptive. They are described as deceptive in the Quran. They are deceptive as incubi. They are deceptive as Celtic fairies, you see. So that is what I think.
Okay. Do you think that there's any possibility that any of the abductions are physical? Any of them, do you think? Well,
I would say that there is a possibility, possibly Travis Walton, possibly. Although the witnesses that saw the UFO striking with his beam of light did not see him go into the UFO, you see. So it might have been an altered state, a scenario that Travis Walton experienced too. But I would leave it up to Travis Walton to, to make his own decision. I would not want to, because I respect Travis too much.
right.
And also there are a few, maybe 2 or 3 other cases where it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Betty and Barney Hill is a possibility
Mm-hmm.
because of the double witness there.
Right. Okay.
But most abductions that I have investigated, and I've investigated about 300 cases all along, they they all seem to me to be experienced in an altered state of reality, not dreaming, but an altered state in which these creatures can appear to human beings.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here presenting my very latest research in a highly unusual topic that many of you are probably not familiar with: the Djinn and shadow people and their relationship to ETs, especially the abduction scenario. Now, what I'm talking about today is the culmination, or rather a progress report, of years and years of research. And many of the findings that I'm presenting today will be in a book that will be coming out later this year. I look at the light side and the dark side. Most of my 50 books have been about light side topics, but it's the dark side that really puzzles us, perplexes us, and troubles us. I investigate negative hauntings and entity contact experiences, including abductions. The title of my talk today is Unseen Warfare: Djinn, Shadow People, and ETs. And the case I am making today is the role played by this little-known entity in the West, at least, the Djinn, in our abduction scenarios, and also some of our more terrifying entity encounter experiences. It is the Djinn, shadow people, and ETs versus human beings in an invisible warfare that is going on every day on this planet. Well, I want to jump right into the Djinn and introduce you to who they are, where they come from, what their role is in interacting with people, and what they're doing in terms of our paranormal experiences and our ET experiences. Most people in the West know very little about the Djinn. In fact, I've met many people who've never even heard of them. Yet they are, I am convinced, after years of investigation of paranormal cases and UFO ET contact experience cases, that they are major players in the field, and we simply don't realize that they're not on our radar screen. We think of them as Middle Eastern entities. We associate them with Arabian lore. When we see pictures of them, they're often depicted from a Middle Eastern perspective, and most of the lore about the Djinn does come from the Middle East. But that doesn't make them Middle Eastern on the planet any more than fairies are only Celtic, because we know about them from Celtic lore. The supernatural entities who share this planet with us in other dimensions do not pay attention to human social, cultural, racial, ethnic, or political boundaries. They are everywhere. Their name actually means the hidden ones, and that's exactly what they are. They are hidden from our view most of the time. And in their relationship with people, they prefer to be covert. They have agendas that they are pursuing, and they would rather that we don't really know much about them. In the lore about them, they are pre-Adamic. They existed on this planet before we did. They have very long lifespans, living for thousands of years. They are supernaturally empowered. They have many supernatural abilities that we attribute to a lot of other entities. They are probably the most superior shapeshifters of any entity we encounter. They can mimic human forms. They can take any form. And that's exactly what they would like us to think most of the time, that we're dealing with something other than them. They have a very strong trickster nature, and this is a theme that plays out in a lot of our entity contact experiences. They are especially known for being vengeful when they are wronged. Whether we realize we have wronged them or not, they will take advantage of the situation and get back at us. Some of them feel kindly disposed toward human beings. Some of them are ambivalent. They don't really care about humans. And others are quite hostile to us. They have often been equated with demons, but they are not evil in the sense that they embody evil, but they have a lot of hostility toward us because their agenda conflicts with ours. They have an intense sexual interest in human beings, and they have interbred with us for a very long time. They do create hybrids, and they have a purpose for breeding those hybrids, which I will get into in this presentation. They have an even stronger interest in reclaiming what's ours. They once occupied our space on this planet. They got pushed out, and some of them want it back. And they are conducting their guerrilla warfare and their covert tactics while they are hiding in plain sight. And a lot of it is because we simply don't know about them. We don't even know the right questions to ask in our investigations to factor them into the equation. I'm not saying today that they're responsible for everything, although if you lived in the Middle East, the Djinn would be one-stop shopping. They would account for everything. But I am saying that they are a major player in this field, and we do need to take them into account when we are doing our investigations for paranormal activity and ET experiences. Now, in researching the Djinn, I became interested in them in the 1980s while I was studying Solomonic magic. And that's when I began to get a handle on what these entities were all about. And I was astonished at what I learned. Not much of it had permeated the Western culture. Now, King Solomon is a biblical figure. You won't find any mention of the Djinn in the Bible, but you will find mention of them in ex-canonical texts. King Solomon was the son of David, and he was the second king of Israel. He is credited with building the Temple of Jerusalem, an absolutely enormous structure which was intended to house the Ark of the Covenant, a mysterious box from which emanated the voice and presence of God, guarded by cherubim. Now, this was a mammoth undertaking, and how would this be accomplished? Well, in the ancient times, they would get slave labor to do that. Now, King Solomon, when he ascended the throne, was given some gifts by God. God asked him what he wanted, and instead of answering that he wanted power and glory and some of the usual things that humans seek, he wanted wisdom, he wanted knowledge, he wanted discernment. God was very pleased with this, so he granted him the ability to command the spirits. He did so with the help of a magical ring. What Solomon did was he commanded the Djinn, and the story of this is told in a text called the Testament of Solomon, which was written between about 100 and 300 CE. Now, in translations of this text, the term Djinn is often translated as demons, but the correct term is actually Djinn. Solomon commanded the Djinn to build the Temple of Jerusalem. And he asked them to perform things for his own amusement, to dance and to obey his every command. The Djinn resented this tremendously. They were enslaved for the entire length of King Solomon's life. When he died, the magical wisdom that he is said to have possessed went into magical texts called grimoires. This became the foundation of the Western magical tradition. The formulae and tools and conjurations, magical words and so on that you see here from a representative page that people would use to conjure up spirits to ask them to fulfill requests. Sometimes the spirits are called spirits or demons or angels. They were in fact originally intended to be Djinn. And the Djinn are still conjured today along with a lot of other entities. This is the most significant magical grimoire, the Grand Key of Solomon the King. It has many translations over the centuries. This one in particular is aimed at Djinn summoning. These texts are quite popular in certain areas of the paranormal today. Now, the Djinn were absorbed into Islam. This does not make them Muslim entities. They simply were absorbed into the religion, the way angels are absorbed into Judaism and Christianity. Angelic beings exist everywhere around the planet. Well, the Djinn exist everywhere too. There are actually numerous references to them in the Quran, an entire chapter about them, in fact, and numerous other references in the Hadith and Quranic commentaries. The Hadith are collections of stories about Muhammad, the things he said and did. And he had a lot of things to say about the Djinn and how to protect yourself against the Djinn and what their role were in the spiritual development of human beings. Now, the story that's told in the Quran, the creation story about the Djinn, was that in the beginning there were angels and Djinn, nobody else. The angels were created out of a very pure spiritual light, and the Djinn out of smokeless fire. The Djinn had access to heaven with the angels who followed the will of God, but they seemed to be different creatures with their own free will. Then God decided to create human beings out of earth and water, and that's where the trouble began. So pleased with his creation, God instructed the angels to bow down before Adam, and the angels complied because they had no free will. They followed the will of God. But the Djinn, under the direction of their leader Iblis, declined. Now, Iblis's name means despair, or he who is despaired. And Iblis said, no, I'm not bowing down because human beings are inferior to us, and I'm not going to bow to anything inferior. This angered God, and he cursed the Djinn and cast them out of the realm. Now, Iblis was very horrified at this, and he went to God to appeal. And he said, look, give us a chance. If you give us a chance to prove that human beings are unworthy, then reinstate us to what was rightfully ours. God said, you have until Judgment Day to prove your case. And so the Djinn were banished from this place into what we would call today a parallel dimension, another realm. But they find ways back into our realm. And some of them are very committed to reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Now, the Quran is actually preached to humans and Jinn alike. Jinn are given the opportunity to convert to the faith. And Jinn are having free will, can follow any faith they want or no faith at all. The very hostile Jinn who followed Iblis became comparable to what we call demons. There are technically no fallen angels, but they take on the role of hostile intervention and interaction with human beings, causing them torment, causing possession, creating chaos and upheaval in the world. Other Jinn retreated to other areas of their new world where many of them choose not to interact with humans at all. But in terms of our paranormal experience, we're seeing the hostile end of the equation. From their own dimension, where a veil or a doorway exists between us, they press up against it, looking for ways to come back and interact with people, to take back what they think is rightfully theirs. They do this by attaching to people, by following them throughout their lives sometimes, by creating possession cases, abduction cases, negative hauntings, and they come through a lot of areas that we call portals or a vortex area. We all know places like that on the planet where there's a lot of intense paranormal activity. Everything, kitchen sink, UFOs, lights in the sky, mysterious craft, mysterious creatures, haunting phenomena, bizarre cases where people can't seem to stay in their homes very long because of activity there. I've investigated a lot of those, and I've come to the conclusion that the dominant entity involved in these are Jinn. Well, what's the true form of a Jinn? If the Jinn were made out of smokeless fire and they can shapeshift in anything, what are they originally? We simply don't know because we usually see them in some sort of shape-shifted form. But this drawing came in from an experiencer that I think is probably very close to what an original form might be like if we could perceive it. And this is an entity that has periodically visited a woman and has caused a lot of negative haunting phenomena in the home and behaves very much like a Jinn. Now, one of the things about Jinn, when they come to haunt a location or attach to a person, cause phenomena and possession or oppression, they are very resistant to our conventional means of exorcism. They don't respond to the usual remedies that we would apply against ghosts or poltergeists or even demons. Many of them can be very firmly entrenched and simply not go away. And that's the case with this woman who sent in this drawing of this swirling electrical field. And her description was, I saw a metallic shape right in front of me. It was shaped a lot like bismuth, bluish green, angular and opalescent. It bends and twists almost organically of its own accord, and a deafening, resonating hum begins to fill my ears. Now, in many cases of entity contact experiences and the manifestation of phenomena, we have an onset of humming, tingling, buzzing, sort of an electrical feel in the atmosphere. Many abduction cases are characterized by this. I associate it with a rending of dimensions, that there is some sort of transdimensional shift taking place that allows this entity or these phenomena associated with an entity to pop through into our dimension. These same sorts of characteristics are described in the onset of out-of-body experiences and also near-death experiences. So again, it's the push of one dimension into another. like to give you a few examples of some cases of their possible shape-shifted form. One of their favorites is a snake. This comes from ancient times. In fact, Muhammad said if a snake came into your home, you must ask it politely 3 times to leave. Because if it's a jinn, you do not want to kill it because you will enrage its family and they will come back and take vengeance on you. If by the 3rd time the snake does not leave, it's a snake, you can go ahead and kill it. But we also have a lot of interaction with reptilian entities, and this brings in the jinn connection. It is one of their favorite forms. However, they can take many forms. Ghostly apparitions, full-bodied or partially formed. They can be beautiful or ugly human beings, often with some oddity to them. There's something like weird or trickster-like. We have many cases in the paranormal and crypto literature, even the ET literature, of very odd beings that simply don't conform to our known laws of our particular dimension. They are often in mist, fog, smoke, and clouds, sometimes transparent, often black. I've seen them as swirling black clouds that look like ink moving through space. And sometimes these clouds will morph into other shapes, and sometimes shapes will morph into the fog and the clouds. One peculiar feature about them is that they are often surrounded by a blue light or a glow around their form. It almost has an electrical-like feel to it, an appearance to it, and these are characteristics often associated with the onset of abduction experiences too. The jinn especially love to take weird shapes that unsettle us and disturb us because we do not consider them to be natural. Hence, they could account for mysterious creatures like Mothman, a humanoid with wings and red eyes set into its shoulder blade that was part of a massive UFO wave in the Point Pleasant, West Virginia area in the mid-1960s. Even though Mothman really took center stage and got all the glory, Mothman was a minor player in all the activity going on, which was well documented by John Keel. Most of the activity concerned UFOs, landed craft, entity encounters, men in black, poltergeist experiences, missing animals, missing time, and a lot of other weird things that we associate with UFO flaps. But Mothman itself possibly could have been a jinn creature because this would be a form that the jinn would be likely to take. Again, something very unsettling, terrifying, and disturbing to us. This is a drawing of a winged entity sighted in northern Pennsylvania about a year ago. I know the person who had this encounter quite well. He was driving home late at night on a lonely country road, and this creature came out of the woods and crossed the road in front of him. People automatically called it Mothman because it had wings, but I think that it's another form of mysterious creature, unknown entity that would be, again, possibly jinn because of the nature of the form. Mysterious creatures like this entity, the grave robber, which I've been tracking in West Virginia, could be a jinn form as well. Again, an entity that's not known to our dimension, doesn't fit any of our known parameters of what a creature ought to look like or act like. These entities are seen in haunted areas filled with a lot of paranormal activity, including UFO activity, shadow people, hauntings, and the like. And they are known to hang around cemeteries where they are said to disturb graves, according to lore that goes back generations. The jinn are also said to prefer lonely places like desert landscapes, cemeteries, and lonely places. Sometimes jinn take on weird human forms. This is from a case I've been following in Florida for several years, a woman who is a multiple experiencer of all kinds of phenomena, including what we've identified as jinn, who show up in a variety of forms. And this particular one was quite terrifying to her. A scraggly-looking humanoid figure with saw teeth and long stringy hair hanging off the exposed parts of its body, and dressed very weirdly. Again, we have this trickster element to it. Why would an entity dress in trousers and scruffy army boots and show up to terrify someone. But it's these odd appearances that upset us because they are out of the norm. And that's exactly what a lot of the Djinn want to do. They want to keep us off balance. Sometimes they can appear in very exotic, seductive forms. Beautiful men and beautiful women, and this is how they approach human beings when they want to seduce humans for the purpose of having sexual congress or for breeding hybrids. Now in Islam, the Djinn hybrid is considered an abomination, but the lore for Djinn and human hybrids goes back very far into ancient times, into ancient Persian lore, in fact. Now, one of the romantic components of the Djinn lore is an entity called the Qareen. And this is a Djinn who attaches to a person from birth as a lifelong companion and sometimes as a romantic partner. It has similarities to the daemon of the Greeks, the good, bad, ambivalent spirit that would whisper in one ear and whisper in the other ear. It has similarities to a guardian spirit and even a guardian angel, since it's attached to human beings from birth. It can be good, bad, or ambivalent, and often the Qareen will want a sexual relationship with human beings and visit a person in nighttime visitations that we would call an incubus or a succubus. It may be pleasurable, it may not be pleasurable, and if hybrid offspring result from this, they are often taken away by the Djinn into their own dimensions. Where have we heard this story before? E.T. abductions who breed hybrids and then take them away to their own realm for their own instructive purposes. Now, in Middle Eastern lore, there are customs for marrying your Qareen. In fact, you can have a human spouse and your Djinn spouse. You have to be careful not to let one know about the other, because the Qareen will be very jealous of human relationships and cause a lot of trouble. Even if the Djinn takes on a very seductive form in a romantic relationship with a human being, behind it is another more hideous form that it will show if it becomes displeased with the human being. These are some of the forms that Djinn are likely to take that we know by other names. Now, they're probably not very often going to take the form of angels. They're capable of taking any form they want, but they're usually at odds with angels. And in lore, angels have the ability to nullify them, but they can take angelic shapes if they want to fool human beings. They can appear as demons, fairies, extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials, unknown entities from another dimension, a term coined by John Keel, shadow people, dark silhouettes who visit people in their bedrooms, cryptids and mysterious creatures, and ghosts and poltergeists. In the years that I have been documenting paranormal phenomena and haunting cases, and I have come across a lot of cases that defied categorization by our known parameters, I've come to the conclusion that we are dealing with Djinn. Now, what led me from Djinn to ETs was through their manifestation called shadow people. These are dark silhouettes, usually of a male form, 6 to 8 feet tall. That's an invasive bedroom presence. There are no facial features, nothing but a solid black silhouette, and these figures come through walls, out of closets, out from under beds, through windows, and they stand by the bed or at the foot of the bed and stare at people even though they have no eyes. When you wake up, you know you are being stared at very intently. Sometimes when people wake up, they disappear, they vanish into thin air, they turn into smoke and disappear. Sometimes they stay, sometimes they will attack people. In 2004, I began receiving an avalanche of email from people about shadow people experiences. And there was a marked similarity to all of these experiences. It piqued my curiosity in terms of what's going on. When I get a lot of email about a particular pattern of experience in interdimensional activity, because it indicates what I do in my work is I look at people's experiences and find patterns. What are the patterns involved? How can they be related to other known patterns? I look at history, folklore, mythology, the anecdotal literature, and I try and make sense from a bigger picture in terms of how people are having their experiences, why, and what it means for the individual and for human beings as well in terms of their relationship to other dimensional realities. So shadow people started piquing my curiosity about what was going on, and I began investigating the phenomenon in depth, interviewing people. I have about 600 anecdotes in my database right now. That's my own cases that I have collected over the years. Some of them I have investigated in depth. Some of them are just one-time emails, and then people don't respond after that. You know, people tell their story, and then they don't want to talk about it anymore. And in addition, there are a lot of cases on the internet. The dominant characteristics of shadow people are these shapes 6 to 8 feet tall. They look like they're wearing a coat or a cape and often a hat, sometimes a very strange looking hat. They're totally opaque. They start out as shadows, they become kind of three-dimensional. They will block out light and objects behind them, but they can disappear in an instant. You can put your hand right through them. But if they decide to grab you, you will feel it, and you will feel quite a weight on you. They are usually solitary, but they come in pairs or threes. I determined after doing a lot of research that shadow people were probably one of the most common yet underreported paranormal experiences among people who have had entity contact experiences. And I wondered, what's going on with this silhouette and no features in the hat? Why would an entity need to come in like a hat? What are they hiding? I do not think that shadow people are in their original form. I think they are in a deliberately disguised and shape-shifted form, intended to frighten us and also to keep their true identity hidden. Sometimes they come in cowls and robes. They are seen out in the woods. There are actually accounts of them that go back centuries. They're not called shadow people, they're called phantom monks or hooded ghosts or dark ghosts, black ghosts, things like that. We didn't have the lexicon for shadow people, but the descriptions are the same. And there's another kind of shadow person that's often short, 3 to 5 feet tall, and sometimes these entities are seen with eyes. For some reason, the short ones terrify people more than the tall ones. Some other dominant characteristics about shadow people, usually no eyes, but sometimes they do have them, and they're usually colored. They rarely, if ever, communicate with someone, and this is what terrifies people, this black presence in the bedroom just emanating this field of hostility and not really communicating why it's there or what it wants. They move extremely fast. They don't walk, they glide, or they're simply there and then not there, they're somewhere else. They pass through solid matter. The boogeyman in the closet is a classic example of a shadow man experience. The entity that slides out from under the bed and goes back under the bed, coming through walls, going up through ceilings, down through floors. And then they can disappear by fading and vanishing and shape-shifting. Some of the descriptions that I've collected from shadow people. It is hard to describe, but it was as if you were to cut out a human shape from a black poster board and made it move in a walking motion. That would be the best way I can describe it and make sense. It didn't reflect light, and no light came through it from any of the lights, windows, etc. This shape had the form of a human with what appeared to be legs, arms, torso, and head, but there were no features to be seen. It was as if a shadow were moving along the wall with the shape of a human, but featureless. Now in this illustration, notice the blue glow around the shadow person. There are many accounts of this, that the black figure is somehow strangely blacklit with this kind of electrical blue aura, or it manifests after blue lights have flashed around outside in a hallway or outside the house. It had the shape of a man and stood over 6 feet tall. There were no details of features. It was blacker than black without really having a true color. It was more like void of all color, with maybe a hint of a bright blue around the outline, similar to the color of an electric arc. It started as a physical and, I believe, a spiritual attack. The presence was trying to suffocate me. Whatever it was well beyond my strength. The fight lasted probably only a few seconds, but seemed an eternity to me. I fought it off with both every ounce of strength I could muster and prayer. It was one of the few times I was sincerely afraid for my life. I couldn't move. I had the physical sense of weight on my chest. My shoulders were pinned down. It felt as if it was holding a pillow over my face, preventing me from breathing. Getting it off and being able to take a breath was both physical and spiritual. I was pinned down like from a wrestling move with physical weight on top of me. I tried pushing, rolling, and thrashing about. I thought someone had gotten into the apartment and was attacking me. As well as trying to fight it off me, I was praying for my life. I didn't have the strength to get it off. Suddenly the weight lifted, and I was able to see my attacker, the shadow image. It was so real that I checked all the doors and windows after the attack to see how anyone could have gotten into the apartment. Everything was locked from inside. Out of the hundreds of cases I have collected, there are 3 words that show up in almost every account: fear, panic, and terror. People may have a single experience in their lives, never forget it, never want it again, and even talking about it makes them fearful that it will come back and get them because they feel that somehow it has a psychological, psychic link to them, and it always knows where they are and always knows how to get them on its own terms, own time, even though years may pass. We find the same hallmarks in ET abduction cases. Now, another thing I noticed in my research as I was going through all of these cases and interviewing experiences, that so I began to wonder, well, are voluntarily form of ET admitted that they or are they in collusion with the ETs? There was just too much of an overlap to be random coincidence. And in fact, it seemed that the onset of ET abduction experiences was preceded by shadow people experiences, sometimes by years before the abductions would start. Shadow people would not come, but they would come beforehand or in addition to at other experiences. So I went back to my database and started doing some more interviewing to find out more about this connection. Were shadow people scouts? Were they drones? Were they monitors? Were they working against ETs or for ETs? And so these are some of the conclusions that I came to, that the shadow people were involved in observing, monitoring, and data collection, and probably programming, because people feel that they're being bored into by these colored eyes or these invisible eyes, and that the entity is somehow getting inside of them. People often ask me how shadow people could be prevented. They would try prayer, keeping the lights on, carrying amulets, crystals, saint metals, whatever their spiritual tradition offered them. And I found that there was no universal remedy against all of them. Some things worked for some people and some for another. But some of the shadow people and ET experiencers had some interesting accounts to tell me about the variety of beings who were visiting them. This is an insectoid that visited a man in his 30s along with shadow people. He would get the shadow people first, then he would get insectoids, and then he would get another variation of the shadow people called the little black hooded beings with red eyes. The insect being was almost transparent, or its outer cover was. I recall a distinct thorax torso under what appeared to be large translucent wings. It also had plumage or types of wings that draped back over its head, similar to an Indian headdress, but only longer, thinner wings. I do not recall much detail about its face, but remember 2 large eyes and a beak-like facial structure. The most striking detail was its bronze, gold, green straw color. I attempted to match its color as closely as possible. This thing did not upset me like the 3 shadows I saw later the same night. The 3 shadows were maybe 3 feet tall and emitted a buzzing sound, much like welding aluminum at very high amperage. They had very black cloaks that I could see very well, and gray faces with no features except the red eyes. They floated or hovered and circled me. The eye area was lighter than the rest of the face. And how often have we heard these remarks from contactees and abductees? I know what I experienced. Others have also. The details are so exact, it is eerie. That prompted me to revisit abduction literature. Now, I have always been interested in the abduction phenomenon. I followed the development of the literature, but I thought, well, if there are shadow people involved in abduction experiences, surely there are some mentions of them in the accounts from the abduction literature. And there are. They're all over the place. It's just that nobody has really known what to call them or where to place them, what to do with them. But they are part of the abduction accounts from the very beginning. We also have the Men in Black. That was another connection that I made with the ET side of things. The tall man with the coat and the hat that's very upsetting and creates chaos among people. Gray Barker documented the Men in Black. And They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. Albert Bender was the primary experiencer. He actually got out of the field of ET and UFO research because of his visitations from threatening men in black who told him that he should quit what he's doing. And this is probably another iteration of the shadow person, only in a different form, again with the purpose of upsetting people and creating a lot of chaos. I also found connections to the ET scenario through the fairy lore. And of course, folklorists like Thomas Bullard and Peter Rosevich and Jacques Vallée also got into this as well. Looking at can we explain ETs from the standpoint of fairy lore? And there is a major connection between Djinn and fairies as well. They both pre-existed humans. They got pushed out into another world. They live in subterranean and lonely areas. They have very long lifespans, supernatural powers, organized into families. They consider humans to be inferior, and they believe the earth will be theirs again someday. So all of these cross connections providing a very interesting picture in terms of what's really going on behind the scenes. Fairies also have a romantic sexual obsession with people. There's a lot of literature about the hybrids they create. They're tricky and vengeful when wronged. They cause bad luck and misfortune, and they can also possess humans. In fact, when I did a lot of research on comparing other entities to Djinn, there was such a strong match between Djinn and fairies that you could say they are one and the same. And then we have the connection to the ET literature as well. Whereas many of the entities that have been documented since we started recording our ET encounter experiences, they seem more like trickster fairies than all very serious abducting greys. The abducting greys and the insectoids and the reptilians are only part of a very large picture. Now, all of these ET forms that have been documented in the abduction literature are forms that can be taken by Djinn for various purposes, like the Nordics, the beautiful people, and the space brothers and sisters from the early ET contact literature, for the wanting to foster close, intimate relationships with people. That would be more characteristic of the Djinn Kareen, but the others might be more interested in creating havoc and disorder. Now, going back into the abduction literature, I wanted to see what the presence of the Djinn might be in the abduction literature, especially through descriptions of the ETs and of shadow people. And the abducting ETs have some of the characteristics of Djinn. They materialize through walls. They have often a bluish glow around them, or they come in a brilliant blue light, sometimes a white light. People are paralyzed in their bed. There's often a buzzing and humming and tingling sound. And the aliens use penetrating stares to perform thought manipulation on human beings. These are characteristics associated with the shadow people, who in turn are a form of Djinn. We have the sexual involvement with hybrid offspring, that the ETs have a hybrid breeding program. Well, so do the Djinn. Are they one and the same? They can form lifelong attachments to humans. People who have had abduction experiences often have them throughout their lives. They sometimes involve entire families. The episodes are usually unpredictable, and people feel they are difficult, if not impossible, to prevent, although people have discovered ways of trying to ward them off. And the ETs, the abducting ETs, and the Djinn also share an interest in the occupation of Earth. Are they working with each other, against each other, or are they one and the same? I think they are one and the same. In going back through the abduction literature, as I mentioned, I looked for accounts that bore the hallmarks of Djinn. Now, in discussing these today, I'm not saying that these are Djinn cases. I'm saying that they bear similarities to the hallmarks of Djinn. And when we do our abduction evaluations, we should take the Djinn into account as players on the field, that there may be something else going on other than what we have assumed. The Tujunga Canyon contacts were one of the earliest well-documented cases, 1953. It originally involved 2 women, spread to 5 principal abductees. And Ann Druffel did an extensive investigation of this. I have talked to her about this case. And then she joined with D. Scott Rogo in a further investigation of it. The principal abductee, a woman pseudonymously known as Sarah, described her initial encounter with shadows, not with the grays, but with shadows. It started with a strange light outside the house that woke her up. And then these shadows appeared on the lawn. They passed through the glass windows, and that's when the experience then started. Under regression, she said shadows, like shadows in the room. They're moving. The shadows are moving. Yeah, they're coming across the lawn and into the house. They're so shadowed. It looks like they're wearing almost like a black ski mask, but the whole thing is black, and just their eyes are out. What are all these figures? The hall, they're between the bedroom and the kitchen. These people, all these dark figures, you can't see through them, but they're very much like a shadow. They're not transparent at all. And it seems that after the shadow people make their initial contact in an abduction experience, then the entities who move into the scene are the abducting greys, the reptilians, the insectoids, and other kinds of shape-shifted forms. In Intruders, Bud Hopkins did such wonderful work documenting cases in the abduction arena, and he does have descriptions that would match Djinn in his material as well. In Intruders, which documents the experiences of entire family in the Midwest, he talks about children seeing figures that move in and out of the closet. They're big-headed. He doesn't offer more of a description than that, but it is very similar to descriptions that children have given of small shadow people that move in and out of the closet, the boogeyman, so to speak, with lights and a glow around its head. And it communicated by telepathy. Another experience that stood out in Intruders involved a shadow person that manifested to one of the relatives of one of the principals. In November 1983, the man went on a hunting trip to Indiana. He woke up in the middle of the night with strange lights. Outside, he saw 2 shadowy figures, had missing time of several hours. Then, about a month later, he was driving to work in his double cab pickup truck, and he looked in the rearview mirror, and sitting there was a shadow man wearing a large hat. Unbelieving, he turned his head and looked over his right shoulder. The figure, apparently a normal man, was wearing what Johnny later described as somewhat resembling a big Western hat. He appeared solid, darkish, clearer in silhouette than in surface detail. Johnny panicked, pulled on the brake, and jumped out of his truck. No one was in the truck when he looked back. He was so shaken by this experience that 2 days later he sold the truck. I have had many accounts of shadow people manifesting in the back seats of cars. And this one comes along with an ET case as well. Now, some years ago, I did have the opportunity of speaking with Bud about shadow people. And he said, yes, he had many accounts of them in his literature. He considered them to be part and parcel of the ET experience, not something separate or belonging to another kind of entity. And I have found that we simply just haven't known the right questions to ask. We don't know what to do with these experiences and these accounts in terms of putting a lot of pieces together. In Communion, Whitley Strieber's experiences, he does talk about seeing small hooded beings before the onset of his abduction experience. In October 1985, I saw something that looked like it had a hood on it. I was looking into the far corner of the bedroom where I saw a dark shape about 3 feet tall standing in the shadows. I saw something that looked like it had a hood on it. My memory was of seeing the shape sweeping across the room and realizing with a feeling that galvanized my whole being, it was something totally unknown to me, glaring at me from right beside my bed in the dead of the night. He was under hypnosis when he gave this account. I then emerged spontaneously from hypnosis. I relived fear so raw, profound, and large that I would not have thought it possible that such emotion could exist. You could take this account straight out of the shadow people literature as well. In December 1985, a 3.5-foot figure in his bedroom manifested. I could see perhaps a third of the figure, the part that was bending around the door so that it could see me. It had a smooth, round hat on with an odd, sharp rim that jutted out easily 4 inches on the side that I could see. I could not see the face. When it was close to the bed, I saw 2 dark holes for eyes and a black downturning line of a mouth that later became an O. And of course, Whitley has, who's here this weekend, he's explored in depth in several of his books his developing theories and ideas about what he has experienced. But the early experiences at the onset of the abduction encounters matched a lot of shadow people descriptions. And again, the shadow people connection preceding the abduction experience. Now, this is a photograph of a shadow person from the home of Stan Romanek. I've had several conversations with Stan about his experiences and the presence of shadow people in his home. And an interesting photograph with a dark figure at the top of the stairs. I just saw another photograph that he had with him yesterday, captured in his office, of a shadowy form. These shadowy forms seem to be part and parcel of the ongoing encounters. Now, the hybrids, are they ET or Djinn? We have Djinn who are interested in creating hybrids with human beings for the reoccupation of the planet. We have ETs who seem to have the same agenda going on. So are we dealing with ET hybrids in the abduction cases, or are they really disguised Djinn hybrids? In the literature that John Mack put together, a groundbreaking book, Abduction, where he regressed some contactees and abductees about their experiences, and there are shadowy figures that play a role through a lot of their ongoing experiences. And Mack concluded that this is a bona fide external experience. It's not mass hysteria, it's not imagination. The same can be said with Djinn experiences and shadow people experiences. They are real. They're not imaginary. They're not going on in the heads of people. They are real experiences that often take place in liminal areas like a twilight state of sleep, or when a person is in an altered state of consciousness. Now, Mack concluded in Abduction that we don't really know what's going on here, but it doesn't seem to be evil. It may even be positive for humanity as a whole. He stated, I would not say that the aliens never resort to deception to hide their purposes, but that is, in my view, too narrow or linear interpretation. We may be witnessing something far more complex, namely an awkward joining of 2 species engineered by an intelligence we are unable to fathom, for a purpose that serves both our goals with difficulties for each. Well, there are other researchers and experiencers that feel that there are positive aspects to this experience, no matter how terrifying. We have only sketchy knowledge of what the hybrid program, which seems to lie at the center of the abduction phenomenon, is really about, Mack said. Yet my overall impression is that the abduction process is not evil and that the intelligences at work do not wish us ill. There is another side to the coin that keeps emerging in the years since Mack did his research that indicates otherwise. The Djinn want hybrids. They want to have staying power in this dimension because they do not have forms that can last very long in this dimension. That seems to be the case with the ETs as well. They shapeshift to cater to our expectations. They hide in plain sight. They want us to think we are dealing with something else, and many of them do wish us ill. And of course, there are other people writing on the abduction scenario who have probed the darker side of things. David Jacobs has broken ground on that. There are descriptions in Secret Life of beings that could fall into a Djinn category, a taller being aboard what seemed to be the spacecraft that people are taken to in their abductions for their physical probing and sexual experiences. This being performs mind scan through penetrating stares in the eyes and directs the smaller gray beings in the harvesting of human reproductive and genetic material. And is often described, interestingly, as wearing like a lab coat or cape and a hat or a surgeon's cap. The Djinn seem to be very fond of hats and caps. I've surmised that perhaps there is something about their real head shape that they cannot completely disguise, and so they put on some kind of hat in order to hide these characteristics. In The Threat, Jacobs talks about having cases where people describe shadow people. I have had people remember figures that look like Abraham Lincoln wearing a stovepipe hat, men wearing fedoras, angels, devils, and so forth. This is straight out of the shadow people literature. Shadow people and ETs, especially the abducting ETs, once again connected. Now, Jacobs concluded in his research that virtually everything the aliens do is for the service of this abduction program and the hybrid breeding program, and that the hybrids are intended to infiltrate the planet for agendas that we can only guess at. One of them may be a colonization of the Earth. This is part of the Djinn program as well, wanting to come back into this dimension to reclaim what was theirs. Now, Jacobs also talked about what he called the personal project hybrid. This is a very complex relationship that an abductee has through life, often from childhood. The hybrid attaches itself to a human being and ages along with it as the person ages, manifests at different times. The relationship has a sexual and hybrid breeding purpose, and that some of the hybrids are kind and benevolent while others are abusive and even jealous of their human partners. Who else acts like that? The Kareen, the lifelong partner attached to a human being at birth who wants to have a romantic sexual involvement, can act like a spouse, and is often jealous of human partners and can be very abusive. So is the personal project hybrid another way of describing the Kareen? Well, there are certainly a lot of very strange associations. They both share these common traits. Attached from childhood, different guises, sexual interest, jealous of human partners and spouses, and manipulative and abusive. Another interesting thing that Jacobs found in some of his cases was that when the aliens gave impressions of their homeland, it was often a desert landscape. The desert, of course, is in Middle Eastern lore where the Djinn like to live, in remote, lonely areas that human beings usually do not frequent. They like caves, they like tunnels. And when I have been doing my paranormal investigations of cases that I believe to be Djinn, I often find them in areas where a lot of mining has been done, where there are negative magnetic anomalies in the soil. That is, the magnetic field is a lot lower than the surrounding areas. This may be one of the characteristics of these portal areas that enables the doorway to open more frequently. And we find another link here in the ET literature. He also pointed out that abductees who are unaware, and I think this is true, because we haven't had the knowledge about all of the players to really explain our experiences. And so people often explain experiences as ghost hauntings, encounters with demons and the devil, out-of-body trips and the like. And of course, from the perspective of the abducting ET literature, these entities would be ETs. But as we know from a lot of other examinations, fairies fit, Djinn fit. So what are we really dealing with? Is there like something behind all of these masks that can account for what's going on here on a widespread basis? Well, people have made various stabs at explaining what's going on. And John Keel, who was someone I had the good fortune to know, had some very novel ideas, even going back to the 1970s. Keel was quite ahead of his time with a lot of his ideas. And in Operation Trojan Horse, he put forth the idea of like a supermind, that all of this stuff that goes on is controlled by some sort of a supermind entity that's beyond our control. We're at the mercy of it. And it has a trickster nature to it, and it does weird things to us whenever it wants to. And he viewed it as kind of hostile to human beings, that this was not in our interests. This idea has been elaborated on by other researchers as well. In the Tujunga Canyon contact experiences, Rogo said that he thought that he appreciated Keel's views, and he discussed some other views that were prominent in the literature too, but he was of the opinion that perhaps the abduction experiences were projections, that whatever was out there as this supermind got a bead on people, on what was going on inside of them, and somehow this connection exteriorized these experiences in the abduction format. Some of the researchers who initially were inclined to see the abduction phenomenon not from a negative or a hostile viewpoint have modified their views over time. In confrontations, Vallée agreed that UFOs are not imaginary, but they're also not extraterrestrial. This has been a dominant view in the recent years, that we're not dealing with ETs from other planets, they're more probably interdimensional. And he also stated that they are an advanced technology with hostile potential. So there's this undercurrent of something going on that's not in the best interests of people. These are some of the common negative side effects and phenomena of Djinn encounters, shadow people encounters, and ET abductions. There are poltergeist and haunting phenomena that plague people, bedroom visits at night, dream invasion, sexual assault, multiple shape-shifted manifestations that we often think are separate entities, but they're probably different forms of one and the same. Thought manipulation and possession, this would be the equivalent of screen memories. Health issues, bad luck, and deteriorated relationships. Now, not every abductee, of course, experiences these, but these are dominant themes throughout the literature. And I think that they all point back to the Djinn. The Djinn have been playing a role behind the scenes in pursuing their own agendas for reclamation of our world, and they are doing it through a variety of entity forms that we think are something else. So our attention is constantly being diverted in other ways. Oh, we're dealing with fairies here, we've got ETs here, ghosts and poltergeists, we've got mysterious creatures over here. They may be all one and the same. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that if you lived in the Middle East, you would be of the opinion that they are all one and the same. The Djinn account for everything. I'm not willing to quite go there yet, but I do think that the Djinn are indeed major players, and they deserve to have more investigation, more research, and consideration when we are trying to explain our experiences. One of the hurdles that Western people have to get over in dealing with the Djinn, and I run into this time and time again, is, oh, they're Middle Eastern, or, oh yes, aren't those like Muslim entities? Well, no, they exist in Muslim lore and in the Quran from the religious and spiritual tradition, like angels do in ours. but they are much more than that. They exist around the planet. They've been here since ancient times. So we need to get past some of our own prejudices in terms of evaluating the role that these entities are playing. And from my own experience as an investigator, they do not want us to know much about them. They are very good at harassing people, and including investigators. In most of the cases that I have put together teams on, there are usually strange things that happen at the last minute before an investigation. People get taken out with medical emergencies, accidents. I have frequent computer problems, missing files, missing emails, interrupted telephone conversations. Almost every time I've been on the radio talking about the Djinn, something interrupts the transmission or kills the program altogether. These sorts of electrical interferences and technological interferences are part of the abduction scenario as well. So what I'm advocating is that we pull back and take a broader picture here. All of these things are interconnected in some way. And I find in my research that people in one field don't seem to talk much to people in another field. The people in UFOs don't talk to the paranormal people, who don't talk to the Bigfoot people and the crypto people, who don't talk to the metaphysical people. And I think we need to pool our information because we all may be dealing from the same page here, just in different ways.